An Oscar-nominated actress who was also in one of the earliest superhero movies has died. Valerie Perrine, who was Lex Luthor's girlfriend opposite Gene Hackman in the original Superman movie. Valerie Perrine was 82 years old.
She made the world stop and stare. A showgirl turned Oscar-nominated actress whose beauty and talent lit up every room she ever walked into.
Everybody remembers me from Superman. And I had a girlfriend tell me that. They're going to remember you as Eve Teschmacher. And it's sort of true.
Valerie Perrine spent decades giving Hollywood exactly what it wanted. The dazzling smile, the effortless sensuality, the performances that left critics speechless. But behind all of it, buried beneath the sequins and the standing ovations, was a wound so deep she carried it for over 50 years without ever fully healing. A man nobody in Hollywood ever really knew about. A love story that ended in the most devastating way imaginable. Just 30 days before it was supposed to begin forever. And before she died, Valerie Perrine finally told the truth about him. So who was the man she loved so completely? And why did losing him change absolutely everything? Who is she before the Hollywood fame? To understand the magnitude of what Valerie Perrine lost, you first have to understand who she was before Hollywood got its hands on her. Because the woman the film industry turned into an icon was shaped, long before any camera ever pointed at her, by a life that was equal parts vivid and unstable. Born on September 3, 1943 in Galveston, Texas, Valerie was a military kid, an Air Force brat who moved constantly, following her father from base to base across Texas, Arizona, and Nevada. Growing up that way teaches you a very specific set of emotional survival skills. You learn to make friends fast, because you'll be leaving soon. You learn not to cling too tightly to places, because places change. You learn to carry yourself with confidence in rooms full of strangers, because there's always going to be another room full of strangers. What that kind of upbringing doesn't always teach you, what it sometimes works actively against, is the ability to believe that anything good is going to last. Valerie eventually landed in Tucson, Arizona, where she briefly attended the University of Arizona. But she was restless in the way that only truly extraordinary people are restless. The kind of restless that no classroom can contain, no syllabus can satisfy. She was magnetic. She was funny. She was, by every account from people who knew her then, the kind of woman who walked into a room and rearranged the gravitational field. Academic life wasn't going to hold her. She needed something bigger, louder, more alive. And she found it in the last place most people would think to look for a serious actress: the showgirl stages of Las Vegas. Now, here's where people love to get it wrong. Las Vegas in the late 1960s wasn't some glittery pit stop for women who hadn't figured things out yet. It was demanding, competitive, and required real skill. The women on those stages knew exactly how to command a room, and Valerie Perrine was exceptional at it. She was tall, luminous, and magnetic in a way that didn't need a script. Vegas became her training ground, shaping raw talent into something built to last. She wasn't passing time. She was becoming herself, laying the foundation for a career that would take her all the way to Cannes and the Academy Awards. But what no official biography ever really highlights is this. It was also in Las Vegas where she met the one person who would quietly define the rest of her life. Not someone from Hollywood. Someone real. Someone who had nothing to do with the spotlight and everything to do with her heart. So who exactly was this man? And what was it about him that a woman as extraordinary as Valerie Perrine could never, not even after 50 years and a lifetime of extraordinary experiences, fully let go of? The man from Las Vegas. His name was Bill Harmon. And if you've never heard of him, that's exactly the point. Bill Harmon was not a movie star. He was not a studio executive, not a director, not any of the people that a rising, beautiful, wildly talented young woman in the entertainment world was supposed to fall for. He was a gun collector and importer, a businessman who moved through the particular world of firearms trading with the expertise and passion of someone who had made it his life's work. He knew his field with the deep, unhurried confidence of a man who had found his calling early and committed to it entirely. He was, by all accounts, a real person in a world full of performances. And that, for Valerie Perrine, a woman who had spent her professional life in environments where almost nothing was entirely genuine, where beauty was currency and authenticity was a liability, was apparently everything. They met while Valerie was working the Las Vegas circuit, sometime in the mid to late 1960s. The details of their first meeting have not been extensively documented, which is itself telling. This was not a relationship that either of them performed for an audience. There were no publicists involved, no carefully placed items in gossip columns, no strategic photo opportunities. Bill Harmon and Valerie Perrine simply found each other, the way people do when they're not looking. Suddenly and completely, and without any particular warning. What drew them together feels almost obvious in hindsight. Valerie Perrine had spent her life in motion, never fully settled, always moving from one place to the next. And then she met someone who was the complete opposite, grounded, steady, rooted in a world that was real and tangible. He wasn't trying to become anything. He already was. For Valerie, on the edge of becoming one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces, that kind of presence must have been intoxicating. Someone who saw her, not the image or the potential, but the actual person underneath it all. In a world built on illusion, he was real. No spotlight, no performance, no need to impress, just there. And that kind of quiet certainty was something she hadn't known before. They fell in love. Not loudly, not for show, but deeply and completely. The kind of love that feels easy because it's right. Friends later described it as solid, unforced, certain. No drama, no performance. Just two people who had chosen each other. Then he proposed, and she said yes. For the first time, Valerie had something that felt permanent, a future, a place to stay, a life that wasn't temporary. And then, 30 days before the wedding, everything stopped. What exactly happened? And how did one moment leave a mark she carried for the rest of her life? 30 days. In 1969, Valerie Perrine and Bill Harmon were engaged and actively planning their wedding. This was not a vague, someday, maybe engagement. This was concrete. There was a date on a calendar. There were plans being made, details being arranged, a future being built in the specific, ordinary, beautiful way that futures get built. One small decision at a time. Valerie was 25 years old. She was on the verge of the career that would make her famous, though she couldn't have fully known that yet. But in that particular moment, none of that was the point. The point was Bill. The point was the wedding. The point was everything that was supposed to come after. The life, the partnership, the settling into something permanent with the person who made permanent feel not like a cage, but like a relief. And then, 1 month before they were supposed to get married, Bill Harmon died. 1 month, 30 days, the length of time between an engagement and a wedding that would never happen, between a future that existed and a future that simply stopped. The circumstances were devastating in their randomness, in the way that only true accidents can be. Bill was carrying a pistol, not unusual for a man whose professional life was organized entirely around firearms, whose daily work involved handling weapons with practiced familiarity. When it discharged, the bullet struck him in the heart. He died from what can only be described in the most gutting possible way as a freak accident. A random, senseless, utterly unforeseeable tragedy with no villain, no warning signs, no dramatic escalation. Just a pistol and a moment and a man who was there and then wasn't. One moment, he was alive and engaged and 30 days away from marrying the woman he loved. And then he was gone. Now here's the question that haunts every version of this story. What does that do to a person? What does it do to a 25-year-old woman to lose her fiancé 30 days before her wedding, in an accident so random that there is no one to blame, no narrative to construct around it, no way to make it mean anything beyond the simple, brutal fact of it? There's a particular cruelty to this specific kind of loss that deserves to be named. When a relationship ends through choice, through incompatibility, through betrayal, through the gradual erosion of connection, the ending, however painful, offers a framework. Something went wrong. Something changed. The mind can work with that. It can find the fault lines, process the narrative, eventually construct a story that makes the loss legible. When loss comes the way it came to Valerie Perrine, sudden, random, 30 days before the wedding, there is no framework. There is no fault line to identify. There is no story to construct, because the story had barely started. There is only the fact of it, stark and permanent and utterly devoid of explanation. The mind reaches for meaning and finds nothing, and that nothing is, in its way, the most devastating thing of all. What Valerie Perrine did, in the immediate aftermath, was the only thing she could do. She survived. She kept moving. She took the grief, that enormous, shapeless, inexplicable grief, and she put it somewhere deep inside herself. And she kept going. She went back to work. She kept performing. She eventually made her way to Hollywood because the momentum of a life doesn't stop, just because the reason you wanted it to succeed has disappeared. And 2 years later, she was on a film set, beginning the career that would make her one of the most celebrated actresses of her generation. And Bill Harmon was still there, not gone, not released, not processed into something manageable and archived away, but carried, quietly, continuously, with the particular faithfulness of a woman who had promised herself to someone and hadn't quite found a way to take it back. The question is, could even Hollywood's brightest spotlight dim the weight of that kind of grief? Because what came next for Valerie Perrine was nothing short of spectacular. And yet, somehow, it still wasn't enough to fill the space he left behind. The rise, and what it cost. In 1972, Valerie Perrine made her film debut in Slaughterhouse-Five, the adaptation of Kurt Vonnegut's beloved and brilliantly bizarre novel. She played Montana Wild Hack, a movie star living in a glass dome on an alien planet, somehow managing to make the absurdest premise feel emotionally real and strangely tender. Critics noticed immediately. The industry noticed. The girl from Las Vegas, it turned out, was the real thing. But it was 1974 that announced Valerie Perrine to the world in the most spectacular terms possible. She was cast as Honey Bruce in Lenny, Bob Fosse's biographical film about the controversial comedian Lenny Bruce, starring opposite Dustin Hoffman. The role was a genuine gauntlet. Honey Bruce was Lenny's wife, a stripper. A woman in love with a man who was simultaneously brilliant and self-destructive. A woman who gave everything to someone she couldn't save. Who orbited her husband's chaos with the helpless devotion of someone who understands, on some level, that love is not always enough to prevent catastrophe. To play Honey Bruce with real authenticity, you needed to understand something specific about loving someone with your whole self and losing them anyway. You needed to know what it felt like to give yourself completely to a person and have the universe step in and render that giving irrelevant. You needed to understand grief that has no clean edges, loss that offers no consolation. Valerie Perrine understood all of that. She understood it from the inside, from a very specific, very personal place that no acting coach could have given her and no amount of preparation could have manufactured. Her performance was stunning. Not just technically accomplished, though it was that, but inhabited in a way that transcended craft and went somewhere more essential. There was a quality to her work in Lenny that reviewers kept reaching for words to describe. Words like raw and honest and unguarded, as if they could sense that something real was powering the performance without being able to identify exactly what it was. She became the first actress to win Best Actress at the Cannes Film Festival for the role. The Academy nominated her for Best Actress. She was, suddenly and completely, one of the most celebrated actresses in the world. The showgirl from Las Vegas had arrived at the absolute pinnacle of the film industry, standing among the most decorated performers of her generation. And through all of it, the Cannes triumph, the Oscar nomination, the red carpets and the magazine covers, and the international recognition, she was still carrying Bill Harmon, still tending that private grief in whatever space she had carved out for it inside herself. Still, in some fundamental way, a 25-year-old woman standing at a wedding that never happened. She went on to appear in Superman in 1978 as Eve Teschmacher, Lex Luthor's warm-hearted, scene-stealing assistant, bringing that same quality of genuine human warmth to a role that could easily have been played for pure comedy. She was magnetic and funny and completely compelling, the kind of performer who makes you watch her, even when she's not the one with the most important lines. The film was a massive commercial success, introducing her to an entirely new global audience. But here's what makes the filmography eerie when you understand what she was carrying through all of it. Look at the roles that defined her. Honey Bruce, a woman destroyed by the loss of the man she loved. Eve Teschmacher, a woman whose loyalty ultimately overrides her circumstances. These are not coincidences of casting. These are the roles that a woman drawn to a certain emotional frequency tends to find, or that find her. People who worked with Valerie during this period describe someone who was professionally formidable and personally somewhat guarded. The warmth was real, and it was abundant. She was, by all accounts, genuinely funny and generous and magnetically present in person. But there was a layer you couldn't quite get through. A part of her that was simply not available, that remained closed regardless of how much she gave in every other direction. Now we know why. The most essential part of Valerie Perrine had already been given away, and the person she'd given it to was gone. Which raises the uncomfortable question that Hollywood spent decades carefully not asking. If she was carrying this loss through every relationship, every romance, every connection that came after, what did that mean for the men who tried to love her? And what did it mean for her that none of them, not one, ever managed to change what she had privately decided about who held her heart? The pattern that told the whole story. Here is the fact that Hollywood spent decades misreading about Valerie Perrine. She never married. In an industry that treated an actress's personal life as almost as important as her professional one, particularly during the 1970s and 1980s, the fact that one of Hollywood's most beautiful and celebrated women remained perpetually single was treated as a curiosity, an eccentricity, occasionally even as a kind of liberation narrative that the press found convenient and flattering. Valerie was free-spirited, the coverage always said. Valerie was unconventional. Valerie was too independent, too vibrant, too fully herself to be contained by something as ordinary as marriage. All of that was true, in the same way that a description of a lake's surface is technically accurate without telling you anything about the depth. There were relationships over the years. She was a woman with an enormous capacity for warmth and connection, and she didn't live in monastic isolation. She was linked to various men throughout her career. She was seen at events, she had companionship, she moved through her social world with the ease of someone who genuinely liked people and was genuinely liked in return. She lived. She was not a woman in mourning in any visible performative sense, but she never married, and if you look at the full arc of her life, the showgirl who fell in love in Las Vegas, the fiancée who lost her intended 1 month before the wedding, the actress who scaled the heights of Hollywood and never once found her way to the altar. The pattern tells a story that the official narrative consistently failed to read correctly. It wasn't that Valerie Perrine was too independent for marriage, or too committed to her career, or too unconventional to settle down. The industry told itself those stories because they were tidy, because they fit the image it had already constructed around her, because they were easier than the truth. The truth was simultaneously simpler and far more devastating. She had already met her person. She had already said yes. She had already stood at the threshold of the life she wanted, the specific, ordinary, permanent life she wanted with a specific, real, irreplaceable person. And the universe had simply, catastrophically, slammed the door. What do you do with that? How do you build a convincing case, to yourself or to anyone else, for trying again, when the first attempt ended not in failure or incompatibility or any of the reasons that relationships normally end, but in a freak accident that offers no lessons, no warnings, no logic you can apply to protect yourself the next time? The answer, for Valerie Perrine, appears to have been to love freely and warmly and genuinely, and to keep the deepest chamber of her heart reserved for the one she'd already lost. Not out of morbidity, not out of a conscious, dramatic decision to remain faithful to a ghost, but out of a fidelity so complete and so deeply installed that it simply couldn't be overwritten, no matter what came after. Friends who knew her in her middle and later years describe a woman who spoke warmly about the men in her life, without ever quite suggesting that any of them had reached the place that mattered most. There was always a slight register of reservation, a quality of holding something back, not unkindly, not dishonestly, but simply in the manner of someone who has given the best of themselves somewhere else and is being truthful, even if only privately, about that fact. The career continued. The decades passed. Hollywood moved on from Valerie Perrine in the gradual industry-standard way that it moves on from women past a certain age and a certain kind of fame. Not cruelly, exactly, but with the complete indifference of a machine that has already extracted what it needed and has moved on to the next source. She navigated that transition with the same clear-eyed dignity she brought to everything. And through all of it, the work, the relationships, the passage of time, the slow shift from leading lady to supporting player to beloved veteran, Bill Harmon remained. The name she didn't say publicly, the loss she didn't perform, the love she kept, in the only way still available to her, perfectly and permanently intact. So after 50 years of protecting that secret with such extraordinary care, what finally made Valerie Perrine decide to tell the truth? And when she did, what exactly did she say? The confession and what it means. In her final years, navigating the challenges of Parkinson's disease with the same quiet, unfussy courage she had brought to every other difficult thing in her life, Valerie Perrine did something she had almost never done before. She got honest. Completely, simply, without performance or strategy, honest. Parkinson's disease had entered her life, bringing with it the particular difficulty of a progressive illness that affects the very tools of a performer's trade: control, coordination, the physical expression of an interior life that had always been rich and complex and carefully managed. She faced it without fanfare. She didn't make her illness a public narrative, didn't construct a platform around it, didn't turn her health challenges into content. She simply continued living, more quietly than before, with the same essential quality of self that had always defined her. And in that quieter life, something shifted. The elaborate architecture of privacy she had constructed and maintained for decades, the careful compartmentalization of what belonged to the public and what belonged only to her, began, slowly and then more decisively, to open. This is the part that the celebrity media ecosystem has never been good at understanding. The way people near the end of their lives sometimes make peace with the things they've been carrying by simply putting them down. Not with drama, not with a press release or a carefully staged interview with a sympathetic journalist, just setting the weight down, telling the truth to whoever is present, because the energy required to keep it contained has finally exceeded what's available to spend on containment. To friends, to people she trusted, Valerie Perrine began speaking about Bill Harmon in a way she never had before. She said his name with a directness and an openness that stunned the people who heard it, because they had known her for years, in some cases for decades, and had never fully understood the shape of what she had been carrying. She called him the love of her life. Not a love of her life, not one of many, not an important chapter, not a significant relationship. The love, the singular, the one, the person against whom everything else had been, perhaps unconsciously, perhaps with full awareness, quietly measured and found, not wanting exactly, but simply not him. She told the story, the engagement, the accident, the month before the wedding, the gun that discharged, and the man who fell, and the future that simply ceased to exist, in an instant that had no right to be as ordinary as it apparently was. She told it plainly, without theatrics, in the matter-of-fact way that people tell the truth when they no longer have anything to protect and everything to honor. Friends and those who knew her in this period, and the obituaries and retrospective pieces published around her death, all converge on the same portrait. A woman who had spent 50 years being faithful to something she had never publicly claimed, and who, at the end, chose to claim it. Not for the world, exactly, but for herself, for the record, for Bill Harmon, who deserved to be named. She said she never moved on from losing him, not in the sense that she was frozen or incapacitated by loss. Her life was vivid evidence to the contrary, but in the sense that the moving on the culture always prescribes the replacement, the healing that results in a clean surface with no trace of the wound that she never achieved. And at the end of her life, she was clear that she had not, in fact, wanted to. Because here is what Valerie Perrine understood that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. Some loves are not meant to be recovered from. Some losses are not problems to be solved. Some people once loved at the level she loved Bill Harmon simply cannot be replaced. Not because the person left behind is broken, not because they're incapable of joy or warmth or connection, but because the fit was specific and the loss was total, and 50 years of living doesn't change the essential truth of it. She was not a miserable woman. Let's be absolutely clear about that. The accounts of Valerie Perrine in her later years describe someone who retained her humor, her warmth, her capacity for genuine pleasure in the ordinary details of a life well lived. She was not consumed by grief, not made small by it. She was a woman who had carried grief gracefully, which is an entirely different thing from not carrying it at all, and in many ways, a much harder thing. And the final confession, the naming of Bill Harmon as the love of her life, delivered quietly and without fanfare to the people around her in her final years, was not, in the end, a sad act. It was a complete one. A woman who had lived an extraordinary life, publicly and privately, finally allowing the most private truth of that life to be witnessed. She said his name. She told his story. She gave him, 50 years after the accident that took him, the acknowledgement that the wedding never could, the public declaration of what he had meant, what he still meant, what he would always mean. That is not a tragedy. That is a love story, one of the most real, most enduring, most quietly devastating love stories Hollywood has ever been adjacent to, precisely because it had nothing to do with Hollywood at all. And isn't that, when you think about it, exactly what makes it unforgettable? Before her death, Valerie Perrine gave the world something genuinely rare, the truth, told without performance or agenda, about what had mattered most in a life that the world had watched from a comfortable, carefully managed distance for decades. She didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't reframe her life as a tragedy. She simply named the person who had held her heart, and in doing so, completed a story that had been quietly unfolding in the background of a very public life for more than 50 years. Bill Harmon was the love of her life. He died 30 days before their wedding, and Valerie Perrine, showgirl, actress, Cannes winner, Oscar nominee, carried that loss with grace and fidelity and an almost breathtaking dignity for the rest of her extraordinary life. Rest easy, Valerie. We know his name now, and we know what he meant. If this story moved you, hit that like button and let us know in the comments. Did you know about Valerie Perrine and Bill Harmon before today? Subscribe for more of the Hollywood stories that never made the front page, but absolutely should have. And don't go anywhere. Click the next video on your screen right now, because trust us, you are absolutely not done yet.